So I was working on one of the indicators of Sustainable Goal 11, which is on public space, and there is that goal has been tasked with the Global Place Leadership Council, which is coordinated by Project for Public Spaces and UN Habitat. So they then worked with about 400 experts in public space from various backgrounds, ages and countries from around the world to formulate what those indicators might be. At the stage that I was involved, the drafting committee had come up with the indicators, and it was really a process of road testing those against expertise from around the world. But what I found most useful and interesting about that is having the diversity of representation meant a lot of assumptions that are traditionally made about public space, what it's called, how it works, what it looks like, were really challenged in that forum. No one at any point was denying the critical importance of public open space, but thinking about how do we realistically come up with a goal that would enable governments across the world to apply this was a very interesting process. Public open space is not just the green spaces in a city, it's actually 80% of public space is streets. So streets and squares and parks and whatever your definition is, that's controversial. Formulate the places where we run businesses, where we build community, where we walk, where we meet our neighbours. So public open spaces do have a role in terms of providing green space and respite and heat island effect and sustainability in that kind of regard, but they also provide a very practical way for people to move around the city. If places are good for pedestrians, then it's good for walking. If it's good for cycling, it's better for health. It's better for road congestion, as well as the social dynamic that comes with that. Public spaces have also been called third places. If the first place is your home and the second place is your work, the third places are the commons of the community where people come to connect. I think any great city is one where that has a strong sense of identity and place and culture. And I think one of the risks as cities grow and expand is that most of the documented planning theory tends to be very Eurocentric. And so while there is a lot of fantastic lessons learned there and we should embrace those, the risk of taking a plan or a framework or way of thinking and transposing it somewhere else won't necessarily generate that outcome. So I think that there is a huge amount to be learnt from the different expression and types of city that we have in the world. And I think now we're in a place possibly where many Western cities have reached levels of social isolation that are so high that we need to now relearn from other cultures about how they are living, working, connecting in a way that's more resilient and socially inclusive. We are more connected than we ever have been before, and there are certainly platforms that exist. UN Habitat as an urban exchange forum, there's a similar Mayor's Forum. So I think the sharing of ideas is happening. I think there is a lag between the idea sharing and the necessary policy and implementation changes that need to happen, because infrastructure, by nature of being large, expensive projects, moves quite slowly. There's two parts to that question, and I think one is that even though we have a lot of increased density and people and requirements in our space, up to 30% of Australian cities is vacant or underutilised. So this huge missed opportunity. These could be places that we could be connecting with our neighbours, growing local food, being more sustainable. And many of these spaces can be transformed for 10 grand in less than 90 days. So it doesn't necessarily need to be this big policy question of how we change cities. There's a lot that can happen right now. But at the same time, these kinds of projects can be helpful as a model to influence policy and strategic change. And we often call that test before you invest or prototyping, which is very common in design thinking in other industries, but urban planning is a little slower to adopt. Because we're quite prepared to spend $5 million in a park without any user testing or any idea if it's actually going to work. But if you spent just 10% of that budget or less, you spent 5, 10, 20 grand up front just to experiment with how people would use it, how they might be involved in shaping it, you get very useful design advice that means that your formal investment in infrastructure is going to be much better used and well spent. I think the main advantage is that you don't assume that you know the answer before you begin. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of people, a lot of experts will do naturally, consciously or not. So if we take the time to really research what is the problem that we're going to address, so in planning and infrastructure, you might receive a brief that's to design a bridge. So what are you going to do? Build a bridge. But if you actually took a step back and actually worked out, well, what are the challenges that we're trying to solve here? Who could be involved? How do we scope and research that? How do we test it? You may end up coming out with a completely different solution. And I think if we took more time to do that and using that real sort of innovative startup design thinking approach, we'd get a suite of more useful outcomes. What I really like about what Global Ideas has done is to bring together the cross-sectorial audience. And I think that there are very few forums that do that well. And so by having that, I think it provides a place to begin to explore these ideas and even just to think about, for myself, how I would then work with the medical professions on some of the work that we do around urban resilience is quite inspiring. And equally, I would hope that there is a greater understanding of how urban planning and lifestyle relates to other determinants of health. So I think having these forums is really critical, and being able to perhaps come up with tangible ideas that we could deliver within 6 months would be a great next step, because it's very easy to lose momentum. So if we had sort of small scale achievable projects that we were going to work on, then that would be fantastic. I think we have the great opportunity now that we've never had before to leverage technology for planning because we have the digital technology. So the opportunity there now is to, rather than having decisions centrally made and engagement sort of done more as a procedure or protocol, we genuinely have the opportunity for people to be able to put their ideas forward, and for policy and decision makers be able to synthesize that into something that's workable and implementable. And we still fundamentally need that expertise, but based on a much broader range of ideas than we've ever had before, and that's exciting.